All right, we're live. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here this evening. My name is Michael Lazzara. I am the president of the North Carolina League of Municipalities. I am also the mayor pro tem for the city of Jacksonville. I want to welcome all of you here tonight to the city of Jacksonville, and thank you very much for coming out. Before we begin our program, I'd like to recognize some folks here this evening. Let me begin by asking if you're an IT director, please stand up. These are our various IT directors from the city, Marine Federal Credit Union, the college, and Onslow County School System. I'm also honored to have with us tonight Mayor Sammy Phillips. Mayor Sammy Phillips. We also have with us Representative Phil Shepard, in which I'll call on in just a few moments. Representative Shepard, thank you for being with us this evening. We have Commissioner Royce Bennett with us, Onslow County Commissioner. We have with us Councilmember Jerry Bittner. Jerry, are you with us? Thank you. We have Councilmember Bob Warden. Thank you for joining us. We have Councilmember Brian Jackson with us as well. Thank you. We also have from the school board, Chairperson Pam Thomas. Thank you for being with us. Truly honored for having you all here this evening. Also, we have with us, I noticed that came in, former Mayor Art Schools from Emerald Isle and a former president. So I know that, Mayor, are you here? There you are. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. And we also have with us this evening Sheriff Hans Miller. Thank you very much. And before we go on with our program, I'd like to ask Representative Shepard just to come up and say a few words. Representative?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate you being
Thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight. I want to cover a few things that we discussed in the General Assembly. First of all, broadband is a critical infrastructure needed to keep local economies and healthy and attract businesses and jobs to our local areas. Everywhere that I go, people are talking about broadband and connectivity. And it's very important to us, and not just in the city of Jacksonville, but I'm also getting emails from people out on Paget Road, Highway 50 in the county, where students are not able to do their schoolwork and so forth because they don't have connectivity. So I'm supportive of that, and I've been working on that behind the scenes, trying to get that for them. So it's very important to all of us as our cities and our counties grow that we are able to keep up with one another. We know that high-speed broadband attracts more capital investments into our communities and our counties. One study revealed substantial differences in economic gross domestic product in communities served by top-line gigabit internet services versus those without gigabit services. Also, high-speed broadband has been shown to show an increase in home values, business revenues, home-based businesses, and in particular, we see substantially higher revenues when we are connected to fiber and gigabit speeds that bring forth that. So when we look at this, it is a great opportunity. Last year we filed a bill in the House, HB 68, which would give cities an opportunity to partner with public-private partnerships in order to provide more connectivity for people in cities and rural areas and suburban areas. So I'm pleased to be here, and we're working as hard as possible to get this throughout our state so no children and no one are left behind in this process. You know, we're the 9th largest state in the country now, and they predict in 2 to 3 years we will be the 7th largest state in the country. So with that being said and done, we need to keep up when it comes to broadband and connectivity for our counties and cities and communities. So I appreciate, Mike, the opportunity to be here and speak to you all tonight. It's a lot better than being in Raleigh tonight anyway. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So what we're here today for is to talk about the incredibly important topic of broadband access in North Carolina. Many of you may know that the League has made improved broadband access a top policy priority. Last spring, we released the report, The Leaping of the Digital Divide, co-authored by our own legislative counsel, Erin Winia. Erin is with us this evening, and she'll be on our panel. We are very proud of her work and what she's been able to provide for us as a launching point of this effort. That report, we believe, contains concrete proposals that can help close the gaps in broadband access. Those gaps occur in rural communities. They occur in many areas of the state that do not have the optimal internet service and speeds that are required for businesses to thrive. This meeting tonight is one of 3 that has been held across the state this week. And these meetings continue that larger efforts to bring better broadband access to North Carolina. Very specifically, we believe what is needed for that to happen is for state policies to be adopted that better encourage public-private partnerships. We need all partners at the table to fill these gaps, whether it's local governments or telephone co-ops helping to build infrastructure. Private providers who can tap into that infrastructure to provide services to residences and businesses. High-speed broadband and the networks that support it are essential 21st century infrastructure, no different than roads or electricity in the 20th century. It is time for all levels of government to recognize it as such. Tonight, you will hear about innovative public-private partnerships around the country that are helping communities to leap this divide. You will hear about the very critical needs that demonstrate why we cannot sit and wait for the internet that our citizens deserve and require. Finally, this meeting is about engaging with you. So before we conclude, we want to hear from all of you. I want to thank the League of Municipalities and its staff for making this event possible. They work extremely hard to get these meetings across the state done, and it takes a great deal of effort, so I want to personally thank them. And I want to thank the North Carolina Broadband Matters and the Institute for Local Self-Reliance and its Community Broadband Network Initiative for doing much of the heavy lifting for making it possible. At this time, let me introduce our speaker from the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, which is based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Christopher Mitchell is the director of the Community Broadband Networks Initiative. His work focuses on telecommunications and helping to ensure that communities have reliable broadband networks. He is a leading national expert on community broadband networks and speaks at conferences across the United States on the subject. He was honored as one of the 2012 top 25 public sector technology by Government Technology, which honors the top doers, drivers, and dreamers in the nation each year. On a day-to-day basis, Chris runs muninetworks.org, the comprehensive online clearinghouse of information about community-led broadband. He has published numerous reports on the subject of broadband availability. He has earned a master's degree in public policy from the University of Minnesota and a bachelor's degree in political science from, is it Macalester College, is that correct? Please join me in welcoming Christopher Mitchell.
Thank you. Our office is indeed in Minneapolis. I live in St. Paul. At 9:30 this morning, my wife sent me another screenshot of the local temperatures. At that point, it was negative 26 degrees with a wind chill of negative 51. So being here is in some ways nice, and on the other hand, for the rest of my life, whenever we talk about this incredible cold snap, I'll be reminded that I was not there for it. I'd really like to thank everyone for coming out tonight. I have a sense that this is a military community in the fact that almost everyone was here early or on time, and so I deeply appreciate that. I wanted to, start just by noting that tonight we're going to hear from several of the innovative companies that are investing in North Carolina, in cities and in rural areas. And I love it to hear them tell their story. In fact, one of them I've heard 2 nights previous, and I'm sure I'm still going to learn something new tonight. One that could not join us is Ting, which helped to sponsor this event. And I'm deeply appreciative of the work they're doing. They're investing in 2 North Carolina communities already and looking at more. So I want to thank them. The North Carolina League of Municipalities was essential in pulling this together. I wanted something in which we could find someone that would line everything up, find the right people, convince them to come out, and let me take credit for everything. And so I'm looking forward to doing that for a long time into the future, but it's been a pleasure working with the league, and I have to say, of all the state leagues I've worked with, I think the North Carolina League of Municipalities is the most effective in terms of crafting a strategy, understanding the barriers to better broadband, and developing a means of getting past them to improve access. So I'm so happy to have been here this week. And then we don't have anyone from North Carolina Broadband Matters here tonight, I don't think. They've been at the other two events, but they've also been very inspiring. Some of them have been working on this issue for 20, 25 years. So I want to appreciate the effort that they've given. And then as a final note, Katie, my colleague at the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, has done a tremendous amount of work to make this happen. So thank you. I'd like to set a foundation for what we're looking at, because we're not just talking about trying to get any old internet access out to everyone. Fundamentally, we want everyone to have very high quality access. I don't have to turn off my lights when I want to use a toaster, because my home is provisioned with more than enough electricity such that any device that I buy, bring home, plug in, and know that it'll work. I don't have to know about amps. I don't have to know about any of that. It's true of water systems. Pretty much anything I want to do, there's more than enough water coming out of my tap. Natural gas, with some exceptions in Minnesota today due to a lot of usage. Nonetheless, the point is that broadband has not worked that way for most Americans. For many Americans, they do not know if the device that they're going to buy will work or under which conditions it'll work. It may work really well at 2 or 3 a.m., but not so much when the kids come home from school. And we can solve that. I believe we are going to solve that. And the question is, what's the time frame in which we're going to solve that? So tonight, we're going to be looking at some of the ways in which we are improving this access around the country and talk about some of the ways that we can do it better here in North Carolina. One of the things that we always come up against is this idea of, do people need a gig? And I'm not going to get into what a gigabit is, except for to tell you it's faster than what most of you have in your home. It's a connection that is fast enough that whatever you're doing on the internet, whatever your kids are doing at the same time, odds are it will all work seamlessly and you won't see any congestion. That's the important part. We can park a lot of cars on freeways. It's not how they work well. They work well when they are built appropriate to scale, when cars can move along at the right pace. The goal of a network is not to fill it up. The way our network protocols work, they'll work best when they're at less than 50% capacity. So if someone starts arguing with you about what our applications can do today, you can understand they're thinking about this in the wrong way. We don't need to justify high-capacity networks that work well with us by having to develop new futuristic applications. It's just a matter of using the things we already do today, but being able to get them done faster without having to wait until the network finishes its job. We can all be more productive at work and at home. So that's the framework to think about it. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about megabits per second because I think that's missing the point. And then the last point that I like to start off my presentations with before I explain a little bit more about who I am is talking about why communities have gotten into this historically. And it's because of jobs, trying to make sure that they have a good local business environment. If we had the kind of difference in electricity prices from community to community that we have in broadband prices, you would see states of disaster in those communities. You would see businesses moving out at a very rapid clip. Because in broadband, we see a difference in prices of 100 times or even 1,000 times for certain business services for communities that might only be 30 or 50 miles apart. If we had that in gasoline, you can bet we would take action in it. In electricity, we think it's dramatic if the price is twice as much from one community to another. And so this is, again, a problem that we're trying to solve. As we're thinking about better networks, it's not just a matter of higher speeds. There's other factors that are relevant for quality, pricing, and customer service if something goes wrong, or if you just need a little bit of help with a device that you don't quite understand. So it's not just about speed. My organization is 45 years old this May. It's been working on a variety of issues, a lot of electricity work over the years, local government strategies for having a strong local independent businesses, trying to discourage chain stores and encouraging local businesses that we believe build a stronger community. And about 15 years ago, we recognized that the internet was going from a nicety to a necessity, and that we would need communities to have more say over the network. Communities have no legal authority to compel a cable or telephone company to invest more in their network or to lower prices. I think that's a reasonable policy decision. It was made in Washington, D.C. in 1996. But it left communities unable to control an essential business input. They really don't have much of a say at all in terms of this critical community need. So as an organization that wants to see strong local communities, we started looking at what cities can do. One of the things that we focused on was municipal networks, where the city owns it. The city might operate it, it might not, it might partner. But the important thing is who's making the decisions. And we believe that when the city owns the network, they have the capacity to make good decisions. If they make mistakes, the voters will let them know in the polls, and they can correct that. We've seen that happen in a number of places. So we look for local control. We also strongly support cooperatives, which are more common in rural areas outside of the cities, where the owners of the network, the users of the network, are the owners of the network. They vote on the board, and they have a strong say in the network. Those networks serve their communities well. It's how we brought electricity to everyone, and it's how we brought telephone service to everyone. And in a few more years, people are going to catch on that that's how we're going to bring internet access to a lot more folks. And so as we do think about history, the Rural Electrification Administration is far more fascinating than anyone realizes. As I go back and read more and more about it, it's really interesting how the policies that really electrified the nation came about because of, first of all, millions of people organizing, but also a few people in key places in the Roosevelt administration, Senator George Norris from Nebraska, key people that recognized that cooperatives would solve this problem in a way that the investor-owned utilities, which were large monopolies at the time, that they would not. And stop me if you've heard this before, but the electric companies would say, there's no need for investment in those rural areas. If there were a business case, we would have built it already. Those people in those rural areas have no need for electricity, certainly not, and they couldn't afford to use it, it would be so expensive to build. And by using a cooperative model, and by using a fiscally responsible approach to building those cooperatives, we brought electricity to everyone. And that was a dramatic change in quality of life. It led to greater markets. It allowed us to help rebuild the world after World War II. And I'll note that we did this. We took a line, a physical line to everyone's home in a time in which we were facing the worst economic downturn that we'd seen for a long time, and the worst one that we've seen in 100 years now. It was scary times. There was World War II on the horizon, and we built through that. We found ways of continuing to connect all the farms, and that was something that, when you look back at the scale of it, is stunning. To hear people today say, we just can't do it, we can't drag a line to everyone's home in the rural areas, I find it almost insulting to the memory of people who worked so hard to make it happen before. So I like to celebrate the ways that it is happening. And then there's something that I think is relevant as we think about this for a community like this, that has such a high proportion of people who do think about national defense, national competitiveness. And that's that we have a lot of innovative companies in the Triangle, in a lot of places around the United States. And we know, because of very poor computer security, competitor nations around the world, China's one of them, have taken a lot of our intellectual property, the things that allow our businesses to thrive, to have an edge. And they're going to be using those technologies to help their own economies. In order to compete, I think we need to unlock the potential of everyone. Now, I grew up in a city. My wife grew up in a more rural area, and I've known a lot of people who grew up on farms. And I have to say that when I'm thinking about the need for innovation, it's the kids that grow up on farms where they learn to innovate that we definitely need to make sure have access to these educational materials. Kids that grow up in cities like me, we can do great things. The kids that grow up on farms, they just solve problems in interesting ways, and we have to make sure that they have all of the tools to do that. Now, fortunately, we have more of the country connected than you might realize already. On this map, the difference between the colors is just whether or not the cooperative in question offers a gigabit to its customers. But in all of these areas, a cooperative is offering fiber to the home. The ones that aren't offering a gigabit yet soon will be. It's just been a decision that they hadn't decided to amp it up to that level. But I frequently hear people saying, oh, well, it's just too much to figure out how to cross this country. North Dakota and South Dakota have already been connected. And for people who are pretty sharp about this, you might be thinking, well, sure, North Dakota is one of the richest states in the union now. But they got their fiber before we got fracking to work. They got the fiber more than 10 years ago in many cases because they had cooperatives that were reinvesting in the community. And so as you think about broadband access, if you look in southwest northern Dakota, one of the people from Albemarle, where we were 2 nights ago, a man who runs their IT, he grew up there. And he said that as we were talking about this issue during the session, he was tweeting out some of the things that we were saying. And people in North Dakota were responding saying, what rural broadband problem? They were kind of surprised. They said, we've had it for so long, just kind of assumed everyone has good access. So we are closer to connecting everyone than you might realize. And as we talk about some of the models today, I think it's important to realize this isn't some pipe dream. It's something that is happening in a lot of the country already. In North Carolina, there's several areas in which you can get better internet access in a rural setting than you can in the urban settings. I don't want to take anything away from the Charter Spectrum or AT&T, who are investing in are investing in urban areas. There are competition in many cities. There's a choice in the right neighborhoods. So I'm not here to make any enemies. I often say that it took private investment, it took public investment and cooperatives to bring electricity to everyone. I fully expect it's going to take all of those investment tools and different ownership models to bring high quality internet access to everyone. But North Carolina's rural areas are not a vast wasteland. It's just unfortunate that you can go from a Lamborghini network to nothing just by driving a few miles, and we're going to change that over time. One of the things I want to note is that if you look at the 50-mile radius around here, there's money coming into the community already from the federal government. This is just one broadband program that focuses on giving money to the legacy telephone companies. And so here we have AT&T and CenturyLink. Across the entire state, AT&T gets $3.5 million a year to improve broadband. CenturyLink gets $10 million a year. That's across all of North Carolina. The program requires them to build out to a level that is obsolete already. It was obsolete when they created the program. It's unfortunate, but we're already spending money today that if it were well redirected would largely solve the problems we're talking about. So again, this isn't some kind of pipe dream. This is something that we can do. And we don't even have to necessarily raise taxes or find any new funding for it if we were able to tap into existing funds that were poorly designed. One of the things I like to talk about is what people can do on their own. Minnesota has a cooperative that was created just for broadband in a public-private you could call it a public-private partnership. It's a partnership between a co-op, which was funded in part by local municipalities, and a local provider that was already offering services in Minnesota. This is a story that I think would make a good movie. I don't know if Bradley Cooper would be interested, but these guys went through a lot, and there's a lot of also small towns sniping at each other. There was an accusation that the city manager, who put his life and soul into this for many years when people thought it was foolish, they accused him of getting ready to get some kind of big payoff, like he'd be driving some kind of Italian sports car or something like that. But they organized over a period of 5 or 6 years, many times thinking that they had nailed it. They had found a model that would work, only to find it didn't work out. Ultimately, they did find a way. And one of the families that was involved in fighting for this, they'd farmed the same land, and they were at least 4 generations, possibly the 5th generation farming that land, and they had considered moving out of that land because they were afraid they were harming their children by raising them there, because their children would not have access to the same opportunities that kids growing up in a more urban area would. So it's thrilling that they're able to stay there and have the access that they need. That's going to be serving some of their neighbors over time too. This is a map of all the cities that have built their own networks. Most of these are not what we would call partnerships, although no city builds a network without private sector help and collaboration. There's about 500 cities that have done this. About 55 cities have gone citywide and serve enough of their neighbors that 110 municipalities have citywide access from a municipal provider like Wilson. There's 19 states that have made that more difficult. North Carolina in 2011 became the 19th, and it's one of the states that has the most difficult path for a city to be able to do that. And in fact, it is all but impossible. No city has done it since that law passed. Wilson had done it beforehand, and in some ways, they were the reason that law got passed, because it really scared some of the existing providers that did not want to have to compete with that kind of level. Wilson, I think, is underappreciated by a lot of people. It is a national example of how a broadband network can work for everyone. They have programs specifically so that everyone in public housing has high-quality access. They have programs so that people who have working income but may have bad credit, they can still access the network, even if they have debt that they owe to the network that they can't pay off right now. They have brought all kinds of jobs to the community, and unfortunately, they've brought a number of people across city boundaries from nearby areas because the state has prohibited them from expanding outside of their county. So Wilson desperately wants to share something that could be an incredible competitive advantage, and the state has said no. Now, I want to note that the North Carolina League of Municipalities, the county associations, they're not looking right now to really fight this big battle on whether or not cities should do what Wilson did. But what they do want to do is make sure that all of the cities that want to partner and work with providers in the way that we're going to talk about for the rest of tonight are able to do that. I think that's important because even though I love what Wilson has done, and I think many cities could replicate that, I've talked to hundreds of cities. I mean, it might be 1,000 at this point because I talked to a lot of folks. Most cities do not want to do what Wilson did. It's daunting, it's challenging, and it's scary. And they would rather do what they're good at, investing in long-term infrastructure and leaving the service provision up to someone that specializes in it. So that's what we're hoping will result at the end of, I don't know, this year, next year, sometime, to unlock really creative partnerships. People might be surprised to hear that a small town in Idaho, and I'm just going to talk about a couple of different models here, but a small town in Idaho, I think, could very well revolutionize the way we use the internet. They've developed an innovative financing model that allows people who voluntarily want to pay for the network to opt in, spread their cost of being a part of the network over 20 years, so it only costs on the order of $15 a month to participate. They get to choose between multiple providers offering 100 megabit or gigabit. And if you total up all the fees that they're paying like $65, $70 a month, which is less than I pay for far less connectivity. And this all came about because of a guy who, again, kind of a rural kid, was the plumbing inspector for the city, became the IT manager by working hard, and developed this idea with a local private company that was excited about these technologies. And so we made a video about it that I have a link here too, but if you also just pop in virtual end of cable monopolies to a search engine, you'd be able to find it. It talks about public safety. There's a lot of interesting implications. Some cities have introduced conduit systems in order to just lower the cost of a provider to come in and offer service, because a lot of the cost of offering a new service is digging up the ground, putting pipes in, filling it up, and fixing the streets, which also lowers the effective life of the streets. And so cities that put in conduit can dramatically lower the cost for new ISPs if they're allowed to lease it under reasonable terms. It's another thing that we have to make sure that cities are able to do as we move forward. So as I finish up, I just wanted to come back to this to note that this is something that is happening. I would be surprised if any of you who hadn't come to the presentations the previous 2 nights, had a sense of just how much fiber there's out there. I mean, this data is already a year old. We're seeing more investment. One of the guys that I present with sometimes likes to talk about Arkansas, particularly if we're in DC, because he says, Arkansas has certain stereotypes about it. And you might be surprised that in Arkansas, the co-ops that are doing fiber are selling a lot of gigabit. They sell 100 megabit packages and gigabit packages. And a lot of people in Arkansas are sophisticated, and they want those higher capacity connections. Arkansas has a lot of electric co-ops that are coming online, and so even though it's a little bit blank right now, we're going to see a lot more of it in Missouri too. These problems are being solved where we have the right tools, and we just have to make sure we're investing in them. And so with that, I'm going to start bringing up some of our panelists. We have 6 panelists, each of whom will give a short presentation, and then we're going to jump into a short collaborative discussion period where we have a little bit more of a interactive discussion, and we're going to open up the mic for Q&A. So I'd like to start by bringing up Erin Winia from the North Carolina League of Municipalities, who wrote a terrific report that I encourage you all to look up. We have a one-pager of it in the packet, and I look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chris. It's really nice to be here in Jacksonville tonight. We are just thrilled that we've been able to put together this tour across the state to talk about broadband and do a little bit of education and community engagement. So I really want to give a lot of thanks to Chris and your colleagues and your organization. It's been tremendous as we at the League of Municipalities have learned more about this issue, and you've just been an invaluable resource to help us understand how North Carolina fits into that national picture. So thank you for that partnership. I work as an advocate and a lobbyist for the statewide association that represents all the cities and towns in North Carolina. There are 540, give or take, every year that are members of our association. And it's a real privilege to talk to state lawmakers like Representative Shepherd and your colleagues about the wide variety of challenges and issues that face cities and towns. I don't have to tell you, you read the newspapers, that one of the biggest narratives that's out there right now with respect to government is this urban and rural divide. We hear about that a lot, right? It's almost every policy issue that gets discussed, somehow that works its way in there, and that happens with broadband as well. It's interesting when we think about it at the League, we tend to see it more as haves and have-nots. It's sort of like code, right? Because there's plenty of haves in the rural areas as well as have-nots in urban areas. But that's how it gets characterized. And so broadband is certainly one of those issues where we see that characterization. We know that there are spots, like Chris illustrated, in rural North Carolina that have amazing connectivity. Likewise, there are spots in our biggest cities that are really lacking and they're digitally redlined. So we view this as a problem that affects cities and towns all across the state. When we travel and talk to the local officials that are the members of the League, this is one of the top issues that's on their mind. My counterparts with the statewide county association say the same thing about county commissioners. Everybody is thinking about this and trying to figure out how to solve it. We believe that there are many parts to the solution, but that local governments do play a role in that, more so than they're able to do right now in North Carolina. So part of my job is to think through what policies could be suggested to our state legislature, and then convince legislators that it's a good idea. The one that we've seen, and you'll hear a lot about tonight, that really has been successful, hundreds of examples across the country, is this public-private partnership model. It's one where government gets to do what it does best. It builds the infrastructure, right? Government has built roads, water systems, electric systems for over a century. They know how to do infrastructure, and broadband infrastructure is no different. In these arrangements, there's often a lease that's given to a private internet service provider or a private ISP. And that's how the basic arrangement works. So that's something that we're doing a lot of education on. We know that it's something that's been a tremendous learning curve for a lot of elected officials from the state down to the local level. You all here in Jacksonville do a lot of the smart things already that we encourage local officials to do. I was just checking with Anthony Prince to make sure that I was accurate in saying that most of the transportation projects that the city does here, you're putting in conduit at the same time, those big pipes that you can run fiber through. It makes a lot of sense. And I will say, I've worked with the League for over a decade, that Jacksonville makes those kinds of common sense decisions. Your city government does that every day. Your city leaders do that every day. It's a tremendous, stable local government you have down here. And Mayor Pro Tem Lazara and Mayor Phillips and all of your colleagues, we really appreciate the decision making that you put in there. So with that, I know there's lots of time for us to talk, and thank you for coming tonight. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Erin. So we have Beth Bucksot next. Beth is the Economic Development Director for Pamlico County and has been cajoled into giving a presentation here, talking a bit about some of the mapping surveys and those sorts of things. So thank you for coming up.
Good evening. I feel sort of like I'm honored to be invited, but the least of these and the presenters tonight. I'm really no expert in broadband. I'm learning about it in my job because my boss said, go do this. So the one thing I do know is when you don't know stuff, ask. And so my encouragement to my colleagues out here who are in the same situation as our county, ask for help. So first of all, why is a good broadband survey necessary? Most of you are very familiar that if you look at an FCC map of North Carolina, it shows that most of our areas are covered with high-speed broadband access. We all know that that's not accurate. So in order to qualify for grants or to even come up with a plan, we sort of needed to map out where we had access, where we didn't have access, where people were paying for access at a certain speed and then not receiving that access. So that was really important to us to prove what we already knew. We needed to have real data. So that's also the map that the federal and state governments use to determine access to internet, and that affects education. So the North Carolina has now decided that textbooks should be online. I can personally tell you about my godchildren who've been living with me for the last year. They cannot access textbooks online from the house that they're now living in. They could at my house, they can't where they are now. So these are kids that were shifted around a lot, and they need to catch up. They can't study at home. So this is, to me, a very, very important problem. So obviously it affects access to government services and a whole lot of other things, but to me, one of the most important pressing points right now, and it's too late in a way, is we have the 2020 census coming up. Guess what I just found out 2 weeks ago? You can only respond online. This is going to hurt a lot of areas of North Carolina. North Carolina was looking to pick up representation. This will impact that, and I see Mr. Law here. I know this is something that's important to you. Thank you for being here today. So the 2020 census is coming now. If they collect that data online and it's not accurate, guess what happens with that? They take that data, and that's what they use to plan policy with and funding for the next 10 years. And that has a very detrimental impact on our communities that don't have representation online. So I'm going to kind of skip over. It's imperative that we as communities know our communities, check our own data, recognize that the way that the FCC is required to collect data is out of date. We need to start doing more to change that. Basically, if one person in a census tract has high-speed internet, whether they're getting what they pay for or not, everybody gets counted. That's why our maps look the way they do. So to me, that's a really big issue. And then the other thing is your businesses and your residents look at this when they're either growing or residents are looking to move here. Somebody wants to locate a business in your community. You know, if they think they have access and then they find they don't, they get really upset. So that's important. So I look at that as economic development. That's a big deal. Where's the clicker? So this didn't show up very well, but that's just a map of our response. I didn't show the other one because I can't. We have another map that shows which provider we had for each response, what the speed was they were paying for, the speed they were receiving, or whether or not someone could get internet where they were. And we're finding there's a huge problem in our county with something called exhausted lines. And I know you're probably very familiar with that. So I won't go into detail on that because I'm not qualified. Although I've been told it's like if you take a fire hose and you poke a bunch of holes, by the time it gets out the other end, there's no speed or no power. Same thing for internet. So I managed to flip my pages around on you. So how did we get a good response on that? We went to the experts. George Collier at the State Office of Broadband Information Technology gave us an outline. He came down, met with us in our county. I'm sure he would do that for you. We listened to what he had to say. We put a committee together. We knew who was in our community. We went and we contacted those folks. We invited them to be a part of the process. We collected information from people who were complaining to commissioners and to my office and everybody else. And then we decided to get to work. We wrote PR articles. We worked with the Chamber of Commerce and the Small Business Center. We worked with our community college. We worked with our schools. And everybody pulled together. And the big thing is incentives work. So people who might not have wanted to respond to that survey, when they saw that they could win a $100 Visa gift card, responded. Even in the school system, if the kids brought back that form filled out, they were entered in to win a $25 gift card. Money still motivates people. It also motivates providers, so we have to make sure that they're sustainable. We placed information on the county and Chamber of Commerce town websites. We asked people to post it and repost it on Facebook. So we had a link where they could go. And we also included with that a speed test so people could check the speed and make sure that that was accurate. Am I doing okay on time?
We're in a,
Okay.
we're gonna, I'll prompt you during the Q&A.
All righty. So other points, right now we've been slowed down on the efforts that we've been making because of the hurricane. That's part of why I was struggling to get here tonight, plus there was an accident on the road. Our county has started already looking at trying to waive fees for tall structures in case we have to go to wireless internet service providers. And if we can't totally waive them, keep those fees so low that they're able to afford to come into our county. And we want to encourage investment and sustainability of investors. So we're looking on ways to capitalize on open ground. You guys discussed that already. And we're looking at a potential to partner with Tideland EMC. So we're trying to get into conversation with them to see what we can do with that. I've just recognized you too. So final thoughts. As some of you have already figured out, I am not an expert. So please keep in mind that I'm not, and I'm doing the best I can learning all this stuff. But I want you to think about this. First of all, businesses need to be able to afford to provide access. We automatically presume a business has a lot of money and that they're making money all the time, but they have bills to pay, and it costs to invest in this technology, it costs to upgrade it, it costs to protect it and maintain it. So we need to be aware of this issue in our communities when we're dealing with businesses. We need to find a way to help them to not only come in and be sustainable, but to thrive so that our community can thrive. So FCC has mandated mobile providers to update their service to 4 and 5G. This creates more competition in areas that have low population. So this is an issue that we're going to have to address. I have a whole lot of other information up here, but I'm about to run out of time, and I do not want to abuse the privilege that you have afforded me. So this is going to be my personal opinion. It's going to take a combination of wireless internet service providers, mobile device tower upgrades, in-ground fiber infrastructure, and private-public partnerships to make sustainable and reliable broadband a possibility for most rural areas. You know, when you have a bigger group of people together in some of your cities, you know, you're able to do things that maybe we're not going to be able to do out there, but eventually it will catch up to rural North Carolina and those areas in the inner cities. So thank you for having me tonight. Again, I'm not an expert, but I appreciate the privilege of being here.
Sounded like I heard some expertise there. I don't know. The issue of the line exhaustion is really brutal because that means you may move into an area, buy a home from someone that has DSL, which might not be great, but it's something. And when they cancel that account, they give that line to one of the other neighbors that's been on a waiting list for a while, and you don't have anything available to you. You might be waiting for years to try to get something. So it's a real kick in the teeth. So I want to bring up Jeff Pittman to talk a little bit more about the schools and the impact. He's the Chief Technology Officer for Onslow County Schools. Thank you. Thank you, Jeff.
Good evening. So first of all, I'm a relative newcomer to Onslow County Schools. I just completed my second year here last month. And so as a relative outsider, I can tell you, first of all, how fortunate Onslow County is to have previous leadership and current leadership at the school system that's recognized the need for the infrastructure, and that's been in partnership with our school board, our county commissioners that have provided that infrastructure for us to be able to educate our students. So across our district, we have roughly 26,000 students. We have about the same number of computers that we support on our campuses across the district. From an infrastructure standpoint, we have about a 20 gig pipe that we split across 38 sites at 2 gig connections. So we understand certainly the importance. The biggest issue I want to talk about has nothing to do with technology. It's really about instruction. And so what happens is when our kids leave our buildings, they're missing a piece. They're missing a piece when they get home, when they don't have the opportunities. I'm sorry, I get passionate about this. Our kids are getting home with the devices that we provide with no internet access when they get home. We're taking steps on our part to try to help that. We're partnering with 2 national companies from a grant perspective to try to offer internet access wherever possible, wherever feasible, off of our campuses. But there's certainly a homework gap that exists across our district. People ask me frequently about, why the push for technology, why the push for computers, and I'll just say this, that I have 3 children, and I think we would all agree that our children do not learn the same that you and I did when we sat in schools. And so my question then becomes, whose responsibility then is it to change? Is it the kids' responsibility to change the way they learn, or is it our way to change? Is it our responsibility to change the way we teach them? I would argue that it's our responsibility to change our methodologies of instruction to match what our children need. We can't do that without infrastructure in our buildings, and as long as there's not capable infrastructure when the kids walk out of our doors, the homework gap will continue to exist. So as a school system, we stand ready to support anything that we can to address that gap, and we'll certainly be looking forward to further conversation. And talking about being an expert, I'm not an expert on anything, so don't worry. So we're good. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. We did an event 2 years ago in Marietta, Ohio. I'm sure you're all familiar with the Georgia one. Marietta, Ohio is in southeastern Ohio. It's Appalachian country. And we had some speakers from the high school, one of whom was valedictorian, who had to do papers on her 3G cell phone and just the right part of the house or something like that. And just hearing what she went through, I mean, it's a remarkable story of success that she was able to come so far being so challenged. But that many of her classmates weren't up for that challenge and should not have had to work so hard to be able to have access to the same technology that many of us I take for granted at this point. So we're going to talk more about the schools, I'm sure, because this is possibly the most important aspect of the broadband networks, is making sure that kids that grow up in a working class family or a hard hit family have the opportunity to succeed just like anyone else. So now I want to bring up Jonathan Bullock, the VP of Corporate Development and Government for Hotwire Communications. Hotwire is one of these companies that's growing rapidly. They provide internet services themselves, and they're looking to partner with others to make sure that they can connect as many people in as short a time as possible. So I've been enjoying watching their partnerships develop.
Thank you. I'm Jonathan Bullock. I live in Philadelphia, but I'm originally from Eastern North Carolina, so it's good to be home, and my mom is very grateful. She's a little upset I didn't bring the kids with me, though. Hotwire Communications, for you guys don't know, we are a primarily East Coast service provider. We are an all-fiber to the home network. We've been around for about 20 years. I don't know how to move it. Not a good sign for my technology. We have fiber networks that span, all up and down the East Coast, from Miami in Fort Lauderdale, where our corporate headquarters are, all the way up to New York City and Philadelphia, where I am. We also head out to Colorado and Las Vegas. We're heavily co-located throughout the East Coast, and this allows us to make sure that our fiber network is reliable, resilient, and fast. And so whenever someone has to go to the internet to view something on our network, they're not really hitting the internet, they're going straight into the edge provider's network. So if you go watch a movie on Netflix, you're not even leaving my network. In fact, the chances are you aren't even leaving your town. If you go to Amazon, you're going straight into the Amazon network. Last year, we added 40,000 subscribers to our network. We also took over the city of Salisbury, North Carolina's network. Much like the city of Wilson did City of Salisbury built a full fiber to the home network in its town. It didn't have some of the advantages that Wilson had. It wasn't a power city. It had a competition come in from Charter or Time Warner at the time pretty hard, and they were struggling. They were losing millions of dollars a year. And we took it over with a lease, and we're guaranteeing $1 million in rent a year to the city of Salisbury. So it's a net, it could be $6-7 million net to the city. And you have the opportunity to have hot wire services, which we can talk about later, and the advantages of having private services over public services. We've also done partnerships in Florida, the city of Plantation. We're building a fiber deployment there. We're doing Miami Beach smart city deployment throughout the entire city. And small cells, we've been building small cells in preparation for 5G. And we have the largest deployment of small cells in Florida. In fact, we have more small cells than everyone else combined deployed. The Hotwire is looking for public-private partnerships. We believe that that is the road to get to rural and less urban areas. There's a lot of private money out there right now to deploy fiber, but they're looking for returns on investment that are 2 years, 3 years at the most. And to get the fiber to these more rural or even not so rural areas, you're looking at returns on investment that could be as high as 15, 16, 17 years. And there's a public money case for that, but there's not a private money case for that. And by partnering with a company like Hotwire or River Street, you can get that you can get a guaranteed return on your money, low risk, and you can also have the benefits of that, the economic development and bridging the digital benefits and the benefits of bridging the digital divide, which, as you've heard already, are pretty critical. So I'm sure we'll talk more later. Thank you.
Thank you. Caught me a little unaware as people who are a little faster than I expected. I do appreciate that. There was something I was going to say relating to that. Companies like Hotwire are, it's exciting because I fundamentally believe as we have more cities like this develop, there'll be more than a company like Hotwire to handle. And we'll be creating a new market for innovative smaller companies to be developed. Ideally from some of the tech-savvy people within the community, being able to start those and keep those jobs locally, because I deeply appreciate what Hotwire is doing, and I also want to see y'all facing some competition from some companies that are rooted in the community. So coming from the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, I just always have to try to push people to try to develop that local talent.
I would say we do hire locally. So in Salisbury,
Right.
we took over, we actually added people from the community and we kept every single employee that was already there that wanted to stay with us.
Sorry, yes, I wanted to amplify that for people on the stream. Hotwire hires people in the community, has kept all the employees in Salisbury where they came in, and this is an important fact. I don't think you're going to be talking to people outside the country when you call your customer support lines, right?
Yeah, they call right into a Hotwire employee in Salisbury, they get someone in Salisbury.
Right, so they're hiring local, making sure that service stays in the town. So now I want to bring up Captain Dan Callender from the Marine Corps Air Station, New River Communications Officer. And, there's something that I remember learning about in World War I. There was this phrase of, how are you going to keep the boys home on the farm after they've seen Paris? And a question now is, if you have people that are serving and they have access to very high quality networks, they're returning to towns where that's not available. I don't think that's the best situation, so I think we're going to hear a little bit more about that. Thank you.
Good evening. Just going to keep this real brief and simple. So Kevin Daniel Callender, I'm in charge of communications on the installation of New River. New River is home to about 10,000 Marines and sailors, compared to the Camp Lejeune, about 47,000 Marines and sailors over at Camp Lejeune. So we're just a small sliver on base. But some of the concerns that we have and like to address is, when spouses move here from PCS orders, from bigger stations such as San Diego or the DC area, even overseas, Iwakuni and Okinawa, the connectivity out there is just drastically better than it is here in Jacksonville. And a lot of these spouses rely on connectivity for telework. As we know, Jacksonville mostly in the area is mostly service industry as far as jobs. So So spouses definitely use that advantage, and when they get dropped throughout the week, for whatever reason, because of charter spectrum, whatever it is, it hurts them, and it affects the families that are spouses that are part of the military. So I think it's very important. Living on base. So some Marines live on base. They choose to live on base, and they're kind of I guess sheltered from the outside town. But I'd say about 80% of Marines and sailors, they live off base. So that's one of the biggest contentions that I think that we're facing as a branch or as a service member. But other than that, we're kind of hamstringed on whatever the city does, whatever the town does, because we could only control so much within our infrastructure on base, within Camp Lejeune or here at New River. So appreciate you guys' time. Thank you.
We've seen some terrific partnerships around the country with local military installations. Fallon Air Force Base, or actually a naval base, I believe, right, in Nevada, is where Top Gun used to be. They've worked with a local municipal provider, actually formed in 1890. The telegraph company left the gold rush, gave the network to the county. The county is a bright spot of broadband access and works with the local military installation to make sure they have access. In Montgomery, the city partnered with, I believe, an Air Force command there to make sure they had the access necessary for advanced cyber training and activities. And so that's one of the things that we've seen is communities working together with local military installations to make sure that everyone has what they need to thrive. So thank you, Dan, for coming out. Our final presenter is Greg Coltrane of River Street Networks, who is our warrior on the road with us, who's presented the last 2 nights as well. He's been racking up the miles, driving all around North Carolina, looking at this issue, and will give us a sense of one of the things that's happening. I think that between Hotwire, River Street Networks, and Ting, there's just so much potential to really rapidly improve access here in North Carolina. So, Greg, please come on up.
Good evening. Thank you for allowing me to be here. I've actually been in the industry for 25 years, and I hope you would agree with me that it looks like I started my career when I was in kindergarten. But I'm really excited to be here to talk with you tonight about what I'm really passionate about, and that's rural broadband. We have a lot of municipalities that we've spoken to this week, and we do see a considerable difference when you drive 4 or 5 miles outside of town and you hit the rural areas of North Carolina. There's a significant change. But what I wanted to speak to you specifically about is the championship for cooperatives and the mentality behind what cooperatives bring into this business model that we're discussing to get rural broadband out. Particularly our company, Wilkes Communications, is located in Wilkesboro, North Carolina. We actually serve a donut around the city of Wilkesboro that we've served for 67 years. And the reason the co-ops were created for telephone service years ago in North Carolina and electric, as Chris has alluded to, is because nobody else wanted to serve those areas. They couldn't find a model that made sense. And so that is why I think in some of Chris's comments, he alluded to the fact that the cooperative approach is something that's been tried and true. It was built here years ago in areas where nobody wanted to serve, and we can do that again with the right partnerships and the right opportunities. The model's a little bit different this time. There's a lot of assets that are already in play. There's fiber assets in counties that counties diligently want to offer up to providers to come in and utilize in order to serve those rural areas, and they're unable to because of laws and restrictions that we need to get changed. The municipalities that I've talked to across the state don't want to get in the broadband business. They don't want to recreate the scope. They really simply want to find a partner that they can partner with, that they can sign agreements with, that will come in and use the assets that they have. But there are restrictions there as well. So we have assets in play that are fiber assets. We have towers. We have water tanks. We have grain elevators. We have farmers in communities in rural areas that are saying, use my grain elevator. If you want to do a fixed wireless solution, beam it from here. So collectively getting all these people in the room starts with projects like tonight, getting the people in the community talking, creating maybe a broadband subcommittee within your community that can be formed by the people who are the salt of the earth in that community. Maybe it's you know, the local school teacher at the elementary school, or maybe it's the pharmaceutical guy, you know, at the drugstore. Maybe it's the librarian. It's just different people in the area that have a centralized feeling or responsibility to want to help the community, and let that subcommittee work for the leadership here. Let them work as an advisory board for the county commissioners or the town council within a particular town or city. Our opportunities across the state have been really kind of caught up in trying to acquire small areas that could be jumping points for our business. We've acquired 6 companies in the last 4 years, and you can see in the map I'm getting ready to show you, just from 2014 until today, 4 years later, we've acquired 6 companies. We successfully merged what we feel like is the first of its kind, a merger between 2 independent telephone cooperatives in North Carolina. All the way on the right side of the state in Beaufort Heights and Washington counties was a independent cooperative that was also 67 years old. I served as the general manager and CEO for that company for the last 7 years, and have 21 years invested in the telecommunications industry with that company. And our goal was to grow outside of the rural areas, and we were kind of capped. We were capped kind of financially. We had grand visions, and we started talking with Wilkes Communications. We had a lot of similar ideas, and we just felt like we were better together. And so we successfully merged those 2 co-ops in August of this past year. We recently received a CAF award in Virginia of $32 million to build fiber into rural areas of several counties in Virginia. But each of the green spots that you see are where we actually have public-private partnerships in play today with county governments, some municipalities. One of recent that we've been talking with is a regional council that was formed over near Asheville, North Carolina. That was a couple of small municipalities, Biltmore Forest, Hendersonville, Laurel Park, to name a few. But they were basically saying, we need a better, improved broadband infrastructure here, and we're hoping maybe you can come and help us figure out how to do that. And so I guess my main point for you tonight is just to understand that there is a sense of hope. If you can get all the people in the room that have the means, have the knowledge to make these decisions happen, you can do it. And one little snippet, I'll give you a sneak peek. We've actually been working very diligently with the North Carolina Electric Membership Cooperatives. There's 26 of them in the state of North Carolina. Because our company, or one of our companies, our Tri-County property, was actually formed out of an electric cooperative 67 years ago, there's a symbiotic relationship there, and there's a sense of brotherly work ethic when it comes to serving the members that we serve, because they're our owner company. They're owned by us. And essentially, any money that we make in our cooperative, we funnel it right back into more infrastructure, capital infrastructure. I believe one of the EMCs is represented here tonight. I told you there were 8 independent telephone cooperatives in North Carolina. Atlantic Telephone, which is just south of here, is represented in the room tonight. And so all of these co-ops, I think, are actively engaged in talking with people in the community to see how we can accommodate the growth structure that we need. But the partnership that we're forming with the EMCs has allowed River Street Networks to be 50% ownership in a new entity that will be combining with the EMCs in order to tackle the concerns we're discussing. Our efforts will be to work with the electric cooperatives to utilize their fiber assets, and for River Street Networks to build that last mile infrastructure into the communities. And so thank you for your time tonight.
I'd like to invent some patents would be nice. I'd like to invite the panelists up, please. A couple of points of order. One is I really want to thank everyone who came out. There's remarkable leadership in this room. There's folks who are serving the community in multiple ways, and so I want to honor that. The other thing is I want to apologize, Jonathan. My wife will accuse me of only opening my mouth to change feet. What I was attempting to get at was that I think that by enlarging the pie, Hotwire can thrive. We can also have local communities blossom up too. In no way did I mean to suggest that you're not doing a great job working with local communities and helping them to thrive. So I just want to make that very clear, because I deeply respect the ISPs that are looking at this differently and trying to figure out how to work with other entities to move forward. So with that, Dan, I'd like to start with you, and I'd like to ask you to just maybe talk a little bit more about why it matters to military families that may not have higher quality internet access here. How does that impact them, and how does it impact morale?
I think at the end of the day, there's always complaints or just grievances when it comes to, the pay of the military. There's often you see, military members not getting paid compared to some of their peers that are in college or whatever. So they rely on that second source of income. A lot of military members, there's a primary source of income, which is the service member, but along with, their spouse or that adds to the whole primary income as well. So I think they just feel constrained a little bit if they don't have that other source of income. $8, $7 or whatever survey wage is, in the service industry is good, but having more of a career, I guess, would drastically be a lot better for sure.
Yeah, there's a wonderful film about Wilson called Do Not Pass Go, and it discusses a family where the wife has an opportunity to get a job and does a test with her internet connection to be able to take the job. She's going to work from home, and they need to make sure that she has capacity sufficient to do it. And if she lost that capacity or didn't have it, she would not be able to have that job. So we have a lot of experience up here in terms of how lack of internet access has hindered communities. And I'd like to just to give a minute for anyone that wants to share a story or two. I think we all have our own reasons for being concerned. It's sometimes useful to hear what other people are thinking about and what they're concerned about.
We had a person that lived
I'll just ask you to move forward, make sure the mic's
We
picking
had
up.
a person that lived in a neighboring community adjacent to where we had fiber optic service. A young lady actually had some health conditions that didn't permit her to work out in the public eye, but she was able to land a significant job working support for Apple. And she was going to be required to work from home. She would be logging in with a phone system and a computer. And she got the job, but the internet service that she had wasn't significant enough for her to take the load of data that was needed to run that job. And so she was only able to keep that job for about 2 months. And of course, she was calling us, trying to help us get fiber to her, but we couldn't get there fast enough because it was quite a distance outside of our territory. So that's just one of those heart-wrenching stories.
I'll go ahead and say, in my role at the League of Municipalities, don't often get to talk to people. And in terms of kind of people who are experiencing issues, I should say it that way. I just spend a lot of time kind of translating stories that city officials tell me. And there are two sectors, Chris, that when I've been learning more about this issue, were not ones that were obvious, that are vastly affected by a lack of broadband access. The first is agriculture, and there is a lot of need out there in rural areas for precision agriculture technologies to better target where fertilizer is applied, to know how much water to use for irrigation in a way that's less wasteful. And so I have also learned that the banking needs that the agriculture industry has are increasingly requiring these types of technologies. And if they're not available to farmers, then, if they're a very loan-dependent industry, those cash the access they have to capital and cash at the beginning of the growth season isn't available for them. And likewise, the banking industry itself, we have a lot of banks that are closing in rural communities. That's a real asset that the communities are losing when a bank leaves town. And you have to think on some level, the lack of opportunity that comes with broadband access can affect those business decisions that the banks are going through right now, whether they can stay or not.
Anyone else?
Yeah.
Yes, another area, just to piggyback a little bit off of what she was speaking about agriculture, is if you look at aquaculture, you're going to have some similar needs. And North Carolina has a big push to try and become one of the top producing oyster states in the country. And I know personally of folks in our county, which is Pamlico County, where they need better access to internet for that. And one of them is actually becoming one of the top seed producers for the state of North Carolina. But to advance more, he needs more access to technology where he is. And another thing that we sometimes encounter is people will move to our county. They're exactly the type of people we'd love to have move there. They buy a home. They had internet at one point in time. The previous owner did. But then as soon as they go to switch the names on that service, then the provider will say that they don't have any availability. So if you have somebody that they work in a job that's an IT type business, or it's dependent, like the example with the young lady who was trying to work for Apple, suddenly that person who just bought that home can no longer work from home and has to sell the house and move somewhere else. So that's a huge detriment. And it also impacts, for me as an economic developer, where I can put particular types of businesses. Sometimes I have somebody coming in and they might want a particular type of property, but I have to go back and say, okay, well, do we have the type of infrastructure that they need there? And one of those things that I consider infrastructure in my job is definitely broadband access. So it's definitely something that impacts, economic development. It impacts tourists. You have tourists that come to your counties. Those tourists are potential business owners in the future. They're potential residents. If they're out there by the water, it's a beautiful scene, but they can't get internet where they are, they don't forget that. So sometimes we try to turn that in nicely and say, your chance to unhook, but the fact of the matter is most people rely on it. They need to be able to connect to business even when they're on vacation. So it's an important issue.
Yeah, and also from an educational standpoint, statistics show that the kids who are currently in our schools are going to be in jobs that do not exist right now. And so the things that they require to prepare for those jobs are the ability to access information, the ability to communicate and collaborate. Without high-speed broadband at home, it's very difficult to do any of those things.
And John, I'll turn over to you in a second, Jonathan, but it's worth highlighting a book that just came out by Susan Crawford called Fiber. Discusses why a lot of this is important. And one of the things she talks about is how in Chattanooga, where they have this wonderful connection, how they're adjusting their schooling to be able to make sure that they're giving kids the tools that they need. And so it's a book that if you're really inspired to dig into it, there's some really great stories in there of how this changes people's lives and a way that different cities are contributing. There's quite a lot about Wilson in there. So Jonathan, please.
Yeah, I can add one quick thing I thought of, though, is we have a lot of stuff in South Florida, and by adding the broadband there, when we first started bringing it in, it gives people the chance that are coming, maybe have a second home, or saying there's a tourist, they can stay there longer if they can still connect back to work, which brings in more tourism dollars. And maybe someone who's using this as a second or vacation home turns it into a permanent home, which is always good for the local economy. But when we moved our headquarters to Fort Lauderdale about 3 or 4 years ago, we put it in what's a kind of fiber desert. And working closely with the local economic development teams in the state of Florida, we created a technology corridor because I had to build my fiber into my headquarter building. We put a co-location facility there. And, obviously it's a larger city, but it just shows that this can happen to other places. But now you have Citrix, Microsoft, and a slew of other technology companies building in that area. And so it can be an economic development tool no matter how small or big you are. And fiber deserts can occur anywhere.
Thank you. I think I'd like to open it a Q&A. If anyone has a comment they'd like to make at the microphone, we would invite anything from a good question to a testimonial. The only thing I ask is that you keep it brief. If you hit 3 minutes, then I may start trying to wind you down.
Hi, Royce Bennett, Vice Chairman of the County Commissioners here. The FCC recently ruled that, had a ruling that limited local government's ability to regulate small cellular equipment on poles, basically. this seems to be something that would be a good tool to use to reach rural areas with broadband. So my question is, I'm interested in how businesses feel about it and how that relates to the League of Municipalities
Yep.
and how y'all stand on that issue.
Thank you, Commissioner. And when the small cell issue was coming through the North Carolina General Assembly 2 years ago, I was one of the primary negotiators on the bill that eventually became law here. So it is an issue I'm familiar with. And I guess I'll just start by explaining what small cell technology is for people who don't know that. It is a new way to deliver wireless signals. It still requires fiber. Every wireless antenna has a wire going to it at some point. And the thing about small cells, they're not necessarily small in size, they're small in the range that their signals can go out. And so these antennas have very short waves. They can only beam signals for very short distances, which means you need a lot of them in succession in order for those signals to match up and provide continuous service. Right now, where we're seeing it is in urban areas, and it's being used to densify their networks. And so in other words, if you've got a lot of users, like think of an athletic stadium, you have a lot of people who want to get online all at once, these small cell antennas can help boost the signal and the capacity to carry all that data during that sporting event. And that's where we're seeing it right now. We are definitely not seeing it in rural areas. And I think that may be a challenge until there's more fiber present, because until you have that, putting antennas every 500 feet is kind of impractical. And so, you know, the Federal Communications Commission has been thinking about this, and they've taken steps like you were referencing. I think it's still something that's quite a ways away for most of America.
I agree with that. You know, these are for urban dense areas. It's designed to alleviate stress on the networks. It really is not a solution. I don't even know that even in the long term it'll be a rural solution. You know, and I think the reason for some of these rules were that, and this applies to fiber deployment too, you have communities that, you know, see a communications coming in and building its infrastructure, and instead of viewing this as an opportunity for economic development and growth and bridging the digital divide, they were using it as an opportunity to gain revenue to the city. You know, put in onerous permitting fees, ridiculous requirements for permitting. You know, permitting each individual cell when you're building 4 in a row on a street, all at a very high permitting fee. And if municipalities want to encourage this fiber deployment, you know, it'd be really good to think about this as, you know, what can I contribute, not how can I get money out of the process of the company putting in the infrastructure.
I'd like to just jump in briefly on that, because I think there's some difference of opinion on the panel. One of the things that I've noticed in terms of working with cities, with small companies, and trying to understand how the bigger companies work, is that cities can be caught being used to dealing with the larger companies. And so it may be reasonable to ask a very large company in return for being in the right of way to build a park or to do something else, because those large companies have people that can manage it. When you have smaller companies trying to get in the rights of way, they don't have that capacity. They don't really understand how to work the system. And so there's a need for collaboration. Now, with the FCC's decision, it moves about $2 billion from cities, is what the common estimate is, to companies like Verizon and AT&T. There are some cities that I think engage in the way that Jonathan described, seeing it as an opportunity to diversify revenues and enacting ways, permitting requirements.
None of them in North Carolina,
Right.
to be clear, yes.
I would say that it would be nice to have them documented a little bit better. But what we also saw with San Jose coming to an agreement with AT&T that really prioritized investment in low-income areas as well. And so some cities saw it as a tool to make sure that everyone in the city would have a similar level of access. That negotiating power has been dramatically rescinded. And so, you know, I agree with Jonathan's concerns in that we all need to find a way to work together on this. I'm concerned that there's been significant overreach in this case.
We've got a small cell over at Camp Lejeune as well. Verizon took the head, and Camp Lejeune's getting it, same with New River. So it's bound, I'm sure that's going to help bring things down here too. So.
And this next comment, you were going to speak about small cells as well, so let's turn to you.
Yes, I did want to speak about small cells. That's what frightens me more than anything. I'm Elizabeth.
Sorry, would you mind moving forward so the microphone, make sure to get it?
I'm Elizabeth Altman. I own the Newbridge Organic Market across the street, and I'm also a natural health care practitioner. And 5G and small cell technology really scare me because I am one of the over 35% of the population that is very sensitive to electromagnetic radiation. This beautiful necklace I wear is actually not a fashion statement, it's an EMF protector because it just turns me haywire.
It could be both.
And, you know, people don't realize it, but the 35% of us that are already suffering the consequences, we're the canaries in the coal mine. And when everybody gets to 5G, there's going to be a lot more, maybe 85% of the people. And so how do you know whether you're sensitive or not? Do you have trouble sleeping? Do you have brain fog? There are so many symptoms and that can be part of it. And it's going to be, you can't get away from, you won't be able to get away from it. The way I am now, I can turn it all off in my home. But if somebody decides that they want to put one of those small cells right out in front of my house, which is maybe 15 feet from my bedroom window, how am I going to get away from it? When I decide to go for a walk and I have to walk past 10 or 12 of the small cells, how am I going to get away from it? And I think we're going to find more and more. I mean, there are more than 20,000 studies out there showing that it can be, that electromagnetic radiation is detrimental to human health. It's a Class 2B human carcinogen according to the World Health Organization. And they're thinking about raising it to a probable instead of a possible. And so.
Thank you. One of the things that I would say is that for smaller cities that are trying to figure out how to navigate this, whether for health reasons or aesthetic reasons or others, an organization that I'm very close to, Next Century Cities, has resources available to try and help cities that don't have a lawyer in DC to understand how these rules affect them and how they can operate under the new rules. And so I encourage people who are representatives of cities to look at Next Century Cities. The resources are available at no charge, and cities can join and be educated on a number of these things at no charge. So that's a way that cities can get a better sense of what they can do in the face of these concerns. And I'm sorry, before you, was there any other comments on the panel about 5G and small cell related things?
Actually, we have somebody in our county who's been spearheading, some of the concerns over the same thing. And so I'm trying to do the research in our county because we're trying to balance everything. So our preference is obviously fiber in the ground. We just don't know that we'll be able to do that everywhere. And then going back to what we were discussing about government and public-private partnership, the former mayor of of Kinston, had a very good thing to say at a rural assembly when he spoke there a couple of years ago. And he said that basically it was his job to figure out how to help businesses that were coming in, and his second job was to get out of the way, except he did not say it so politely.
Hey, good evening. I'm Jason Dart. I'm the tail of woe, I guess, that you were talking about. We bought a house here about 2 years ago. Everything was fine. We got there, tried to get the internet access, and there is none. Mm-hmm. And I've been roundly rejected by both of the companies that would cover this area. My next door neighbor, 20 feet from my house, has beautiful broadband, and I can't get a signal. I can't get anything. I am stuck with HughesNet. Anybody in here on HughesNet?
It's a satellite internet provider.
Praise Jesus or whomever you pray to that you don't have HughesNet, because I'm a pastor, praise Jesus, but they offer up to 25 gigs.
Megabits.
whatever. Up to, that's an important phrase there, because anything that I have to do of importance, I have to take out my iPhone because it is faster than the signal that comes into my house. I have two boys that they're 14 and 12 doing school. I'm sensitive to this stuff. They can't do anything on this stuff. So rather than simply talk about how bad my situation sucks, I want to know, what is the timeline? Because when I've asked these questions, there is simply, I'm told there is no plan. There is no plan to put anything in there. And I think the waiting list sounds wonderful if it existed. I don't know that it exists. I'm not on a waiting list. They don't want my money. They don't want my business. I'm stuck. So is there a timeline for here? And I don't live rurally, by the way. I live in a subdivision, not far from anything. So I'm stuck here. What's the timeline to fix this then around here? Thanks.
I have a question. Does your neighbor on the other side have internet? Excuse me. Pastor.
I'm sorry.
Does your neighbor on the other side have internet? The one on one side does, but does the one on the other side?
Did. So obviously we're a transitional neighborhood. Young Marine moved in there after, so when I bought the house, the neighbor on both sides each had the same service, and it was broadband. CenturyLink, I guess it was, both of them CenturyLink customers. And I couldn't get it. Neighbors on each side had it, because I could see their Wi-Fi SSID. Wasn't stealing, I promise. But both of them had it. Then the house on the other side sold, and now my new neighbor there can't get it.
That's exhaustion.
I understand.
Yeah, there is, in theory, the Federal Communications Commission could do something about this. There's no sense that they will. I would say that.
Well, and please understand, I'm not for government compulsion. I'm a free market capitalist here also, so I get it. But I'm just like, let's bring. I'm here to spend money with the capitalists here. I'll be a customer. You know.
So you're a neighborhood, and there's a neighborhood in Cameron, North Carolina, right next to Fort Bragg that I know of. And as an association of people, they have bad broadband. And they band together to buy from an ISP, and they have fiber to the home, and they're relatively, broadband deserted neighborhood or area, and all the neighborhood got built out, but you have the purchasing power of everyone in your neighborhood if you band it together. So there's micro community solutions that are on top of community solutions that you can look at. Yeah. You don't have to think of just, what is my county or my city going to do? You guys have, I don't know how many homes in your neighborhood. This cone had probably 300-400 homes, and that was enough to get them, a fiber to the home solution with a commitment to business to folks.
I can't help you necessarily figure out a solution to the problem, but I can help the room understand essentially what may be happening. And that is bonding copper payers to bring faster broadband service is a practice in the copper world of telecom companies. And what I'm seeing from the competitors outside of our networks is they have cannibalized all of their available open copper in an effort to try to help. And so in that cannibalization of the copper, they don't have vacant copper to bond, hypothetically, for your account. That's why your neighbors are getting it. And it could very well be that if one of your neighbors moves out and sells their home, the next person that moves in will be denied service.
Oh, I'm sure that's going to happen.
I've had a lady reach out to me from Greensboro, North Carolina, that's moving to the eastern side of the state where one of our fiber properties is. She sits on the other side of the river. The land that she's bought is just on the other side of what's really a creek. And she wanted fiber service from us, but we're not over there yet. And she called the incumbent in the territory, and they've told her they can't even provide her phone service there. So it's because they're having to they're using extra copper, bonding two pair together to provide significant broadband. But you have to understand the copper networks were never really created to have this over cannibalizing of copper. So it's just a problem we have, and it's going to get worse if we don't try to find solutions. And I agree with Jonathan in that your subdivision could come together. You could possibly reach out and find a WISP that would be interested, a wireless internet service provider that would be willing to come in and.
Like HughesNet?
No, it's a difference. Not to get too technical, but when you use a product like HughesNet, the service is traveling many miles from Earth into orbit to a satellite dish. There's a lot of packet delay that causes services just not to function properly. And
It's actually
so
a bit of a miracle.
it is.
Oh, it is. I'm impressed. I'm frustrated and impressed. It's
Yeah.
like when I have to wait to fly. I get it. It's,
But what a WISP would do, and a little bit different than small cell. Small cell is a more concentrated bandwidth that's in a community that only serves so many thousand feet away from the unit. What a WISP would do is they would create an arrangement with another internet provider that's in proximity to you, where they would lease backhaul or bandwidth from that provider, and they would carry it out into a community on a water tank or a grain elevator, maybe just a tall pole that they put up. And then they can serve people off of that. And the frequency is not as strong as like a small cell frequency, but it's able to provide ample amounts of bandwidth in the interim until fiber can be laid to get to you. And that's part of the strategy. Some of the strategies that our company is approaching is how can we quickly get to people. I have found a sense of hope in some of the conversations that Chris and I have had that, we were thinking it's going to take 20 years or more, given the fact that either a county can't or won't throw money at helping build fiber backbones within the county that they could turn around and lease out to providers who are willing to come in and build out to the customer. It creates more of a complicated issue. So if we could get more partners, and that's my thing, is if we could get more partners, if we could get counties, if we could get municipalities to lease their assets over to providers that are willing to take the chances to form those partnerships. You're not going to see the incumbents do that, but cooperatives are willing to do that. Then they can come into your area and provide a fixed wireless solution until they can gain the interest to go out with fiber into those areas. So, sorry about the.
Thank you. Thank you. One of the things that I would just highlight is that this would be a great time to remind the audience that one or two phone calls to a state representative, state senator makes a big difference. 5 to 10 really makes it a priority. So I hope that you are talking with your state legislators, your national legislators as well.
If I may, we have a community in Pamlico County called River Dunes, and one of the things that they did was they planned ahead. So when they started to develop that community, they put fiber in the ground, and they had an agreement with CenturyLink that CenturyLink would provide them up to 100. And so they're kind of locked in on that. They have the best internet in that section of our county, even though the people on the other parts of the same line aren't receiving much at all, or some not able to get any. But it was because they planned ahead. So if we can think ahead as planners, developers, county government, town government, whenever somebody decides they're going to start building a bunch of houses, create a subdivision, if we can encourage them to go ahead and put the fiber in the ground, that would help a lot. So we need to just start being forward-thinking.
Ma'am?
Hi, my name is Deborah Houston, and I'm with Eastern Carolina Broadband. For the ones who don't know, we are a WISP in Eastern North Carolina. My question, I want to get some free advice while you're sitting here. There's many cities and municipalities that do not understand the smaller WISP or ISPs financial limitations. But they hear about the kind of money that they could possibly get from, for example, the big cell phone companies and how much people can get when you put things on their towers. So how should the smaller WISP or ISPs deal with those cities, deal with is a lack of a better word, those cities and municipalities to provide the residents that are underserved and unserved?
So I'll take a crack at this as someone who talks with municipal officials on a daily basis. This issue is one that we have found we're starting with a low level of education. Mm-hmm. And as an association, as much as a part of our political strategy as anything, we've done a lot to try to help people understand the vocabulary, even just the words we use to talk about this. I think elected officials are usually pretty well versed in issues like education and healthcare, economic development. We read about it in the papers. I mean, that's another thing. There's not a ton of reporting on this issue, even though it's a critical one now. And so I think it's hard to have a conversation if you don't even know the words to start with. My advice, I think so that it's incumbent on associations like ours to help. And I feel like we are taking some of those steps now. I think, if I was approaching a city official and I was in your shoes, I would just presume they know nothing and just start very basically. Ask them to consult with other city officials. There are listservs that our public university systems maintain that elected officials can use to consult each other. And often I will see them ask that question, what's the rate that you were negotiating with such and such company? Our lease is up now. So I know that they are aware of that part of it at least and are asking their colleagues, to share best practices.
Yes, I would just say one other thing, which is Next Century Cities likes to try to play this education role as well. And so you should feel free to reach out to me or anyone on the website that you can find. And we'd be happy to try to figure out how to create some resources to, from a third-party perspective that isn't biased in the way to provide just background material of appropriate pricing.
Wonderful, thank you. A little extra on that. What I was really wondering, more of, a lot of municipalities are very gracious and they want to help their residents there. And there is a lot of ones that are uneducated and all they hear about is, oh, well, we get this many thousands of dollars because this person wants to put one thing on a cell phone tower. Everyone who knows starts with a small WISP, beginning anyway, knows that there's not a lot of money behind it to begin with. And a lot of them do not understand that. And as much as you try to help them understand that, you can suggest to go to their neighbors, municipalities next to them or so forth. Some of them are just not willing to get past that fact of we want these thousands of dollars that we get from the cell phone company. That is one of the bigger struggles that a lot of WISP are finding, and that's just something that we need help with. And if there's something.
Chris,
Yeah.
I would say that you would go back to the elected officials in that area and say that if there's a great business case to be in your town, why aren't there other providers already here doing it? And in most of your rural areas, you have a challenge as a WISP coming in, wanting to get on a structure there to provide maybe 40 or 50 people. Most sectorized antennas, if you put them in the right location, you can serve about 200 customers off of that sector. But then you have to buy bandwidth from somebody to get from that location. As Aaron mentioned earlier, wireless doesn't work without some type of circuit to the wireless tower, preferably fiber. And so it's an opportunity to make money, but it's not something like the cellular companies that have thousands of customers hitting that tower on a daily basis. And so I would ask the question in that way and say, we want to try it. Also look at maybe some revenue sharing opportunities. Try to build in a revenue share based on the number of customers that you serve through your WISP, so that maybe they give you free access on the tower. In return, you share revenue with them based on the number of subs you have.
Sorry, I just wanted to, it's a very good conversation. I want to make sure, are you waiting to ask a question? Yes. Okay, well, you're going to be our last question, so I don't want to cut you off because you have been waiting nicely, so if you don't mind, come on up. We're going to answer it as quickly as we can.
I'm Dr. Judy Stevenson, and I'm not a techie person. I enjoy all the opportunities of using technology at home, and as an educator of 46 years, I see how the connectivity is very important in education. And heard you talk about the business model and the economy, the work opportunities that are brought in, but I do want to bring up one issue that really concerns me. And I have gone online and looked up broadband and 5G, and this is the damage that the radiation that's put out by all of the wonderful technology that we have in our homes today and in our businesses and in the schools today, the damages that are potential for our children. And I see a exponential growth in the numbers of children who present with autism, ADHD. Teachers will tell you in the classroom, we cannot keep children on task. Their minds are everywhere. And we know that it does indeed affect the hippocampus. And I have a great concern for our children. So even though the final results aren't in, I do know that neurosurgeons are very cautious about 5G. 4G does quite well, and I'm sorry that some people don't have the connectivity that their neighbors have, but with the new innovative things, like iRobots, which I love, and like I said, I am very positive in terms of technology, but we have to look not only at the disadvantages of not having this high-powered connectivity as a business model, we also need to take a look and be concerned about the consequences of the potential cost to our children.
Thank you. I would say that what Aaron had said earlier, I think, is relevant in terms of the power of the 5G radios and to the extent that one may not expect public policy to move in the direction of blocking that. Building materials and things you can do in your home yourself are available. Even I shouldn't get too far out ahead of myself, but there are ways of trying to isolate your home on the inside.
Yes.
And so if people are concerned about that, that would be the direction to look. Because I do not believe that we're going to see any public policy switching on this in the near future from what I can tell.
I do know that some of our big tech people don't allow their children even to have cell phones or even sit in front of the television. So there is something there, and we do need to have a concern for our children and the changes that can be made.
I've been told that we have time for one more special question.
This is
Thank you.
Brian Jackson, Jacksonville City Council. Speaking as a veteran, and one of the issues, I was actually a liaison to the National Guard Bureau, and when we had a lot of folks coming from Title 10 for the National Guard, ended up in Title 32, they're back in more rural areas. And the way the VA is better communicating with veterans now is through secure messaging. I can't make a phone call to get a hold of my doctor, but if I can send an email via secure messaging, they're going to get back in contact with me. I think it was this week also that Secretary Wilkie spoke over streaming internet to the veterans. So a lot of opportunities are being missed for those that are out in the rural areas concerning information you can be getting from the VA. So it's important, and maybe even start communicating with your veteran service organizations and other folks to kind of push this forward. That's it. Thank you. Now.
I think that's so important. I'll say that the VA has reached out to me and many other folks that work in this field because they have the goal of making sure that every veteran has broadband in their home. And I was very impressed with their commitment to solving the problem, but the scale of the problem is so great to the extent that veterans groups would get involved in making sure that there's policies prioritizing this sort of access. That would make a big difference to move it more rapidly and make sure it's closer to 7 years rather than 20 years so we get everyone connected with a high-quality wired connection would be my preference. With that, I would ordinarily try to give the panel more time, but we've run over. I've really appreciated all the contributions. I want to bring up Michael Azara for some closing comments, although I would just ask the PowerPoint be put back up because anyone who's willing to do a little survey about this, it's very fast on your cell phone. We'd love to get your reaction and what we can do better.
Thank you very much, Chris. Thank you, and I'd like to thank the panel for being so gracious to be with us tonight and answer all the questions and concerns. And I think to corral it back to the reason why we're here today, we've heard obviously many reasons why broadband is the 21st century infrastructure. It is not a luxury, it's a necessity for so many reasons, and we could probably sit here for many hours and find new ideas on why it's so important. But I think the conversation, to corral the conversation here tonight is that in North Carolina, municipalities do not have the ability to enter into public-private partnerships to allow us to engage with some of these companies that we can bring this together, bridge that rural-urban divide. And the other thing is, too, there's many urban areas that don't have adequate internet. It's not just a rural area. And, you know, when you talk about economic development, that's huge. If a company can't get proper broadband, they are not gonna come to you. That's just how it is. Or if a company that's growing cannot get increased broadband, they're leaving. They have no choice. So again, it's an extremely important topic. I'm very pleased that that Representative Shepard was here tonight. He's very favorable on our conversation, and we need to ensure that we reach out to our delegation and you personally share your story with them on whether you are for it or against it. But we need you to make those contacts, and that's what this conversation is all about. We're listening to you, and we're working on your behalf, and that's why we're here tonight. So thank you again, and especially thanking Glenn Hargett and the Jacksonville City team for putting this on and being so gracious to have us. And all this is televised, so you can go back and view it and at your leisure at home, or if you need to come back to it for any sort of reference or share it, you can see it on G10 TV, and you can share it with others as well. So thank you very much, and have a good evening. Thank you. Appreciate you, Chris.
Absolutely. Okay. So just a quick note, that's not the